Hello, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Pop Screen, the Geek Show podcast that covers the good, the bad, and the breathless of movies, either starring by or about pop stars. No, the podcast covers a broad range of musical and cinematic genres, from country and western to hip-hop, from documentaries to science fiction. I'm your host, Graham Williamson. I'm a writer for the Geek Show and Byline Times, and I also make short films, and I'm on Letterboxd like everyone else should be. And I am joined this week by...
It's Andrew again. Hello.
Hello there.
I'm much less impressive than Graham is, but I do have a letterbox, so in that sense we are the same.
Yeah. Well, you of course have a podcast of your own, do you not, Andrew?
I do indeed, the Behold podcast, which you can find if you Google Behold podcast and stomp around the internet a bit, we're somewhere out there.
Yes, you get quite a lot of Christian podcasts, but I think yours stands out.
Yes, we are certainly, I'd like to think, the only podcast called Behold that talks about movies and TV shows based on comic books.
Yes. Which makes this, do we want to call it a crossover episode? Because we're definitely on each other's turf here.
Yeah, we are certainly at the intersection of the Venn diagram.
Yes, definitely. Because this week we are kicking off a month of films dedicated to Madonna, whose first album came out 40 years ago, with Dick Tracy.
Indeed.
And this is a film that you wanted to do based on, I don't know, some unresolved childhood shit, was it?
It's genuinely, this was, as a child, one of my absolute top favourite films.
Nice. Well, you know, I'm not going to laugh because I watched it. I think this is the first time I've seen the whole thing. I was certainly aware of it as a kid in ways that I'm sure we'll get on to, but I was not much of a moviegoer. So I watched it all the way through for the first time. And, you know, there's some things that could have been tuned up, but overall, I think it holds up.
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised because it's kind of been one of those films I've always been afraid to go back to a bit, just because it seems so much like, oh, yeah, this definitely, as an adult, I'm just going to find like very silly, very hokey. Like, I'm sure there's certainly certain performances that maybe don't hold up, who I guess might be kind of one of the focal points of this episode. But no, I'll be honest. I got to the end of the film and thought, you know what? Still bloody love it.
Yeah, young Andrew made a solid choice.
He did indeed. Even if like my desire for a communicator watch is like somewhat dampened by the fact that basically mobile phones have replaced them.
That's very true, yes. This is one of the things that I thought was interesting because John Higgs, the very fine non-fiction author and cultural critic John Higgs, has a term called the arrow flight prediction, and he illustrated it with an example from Chester Gould's Dick Tracy comics, where it is very easy, he said, to look back at old 30s and 40s Dick Tracy strips and go, wow, they're doing video calls back then. This guy must have seen the future. But what Gould had actually done was look at television, think, well, most technology tends to get smaller and more accessible, and imagine that in the future we'll have video calls that basically work on the same principles as television. And of course, mobile phones and the communications devices we are chatting on right now work using completely different mechanical principles to television. I wanted to raise that because Warren Beatty played Dick Tracy again this year. I don't know if you're aware of this.
I'm vaguely wasn't this like some Zoom interview he did?
Yes, yeah, a Zoom interview he did with both himself and himself as Dick Tracy called Tracy Zooms In, which every sort of 10 or 15 years he makes one of these things to hang on to the rights, which there was like a famous imbroglio between him and Disney over. And
Yes, because I believe that's why there's never been like a proper sequel or anything to this film, is just because of the absolute horrible rights snafu.
yes, yeah, absolutely. Weirdly, you would think if you were like unaware of the backstory that it would be Beatty, the great rebel leading man of the 70s New Hollywood, the collaborator with Arthur Penn and Robert Altman, who would be saying, no, my vision must be kept pure. And you would think that Disney would want to pimp it out into a franchise. It seems to be the opposite. Warren Beatty is still saying, I think there's another film we could get out of Dick Tracy, you know, 33 years on, and Disney are like, there is absolutely no way in hell we're making another Dick Tracy film.
Yeah, I mean, I assume it's just that he has some kind of like underground room in his mansion full of Dick Tracy memorabilia, and he wants to add another wing to it or something.
Yeah. I mean, these shots are bizarrely elaborate. The first one he did was shot by Emmanuel Luzbecki, the cinematographer famous for shooting The Tree of Life and The Revenant, which is
Yes, because who better?
I don't know if he's got Luzbecki back for like his Zoom meeting with Leonard Maltin or whatever it was. But yes, bizarre stuff. But the film itself is quite an odd project in itself, really, isn't it? Particularly when viewed nowadays.
Yes, well, I think kind of in terms of why the film exists, it's one of possibly my favorite examples of Hollywood just Hollywood execs, I mean, just absolutely not having any idea about anything. Because Dick Tracy, this film came out in 1990,
Hmm.
and of course, the year before that, you had Batman, which came,
Yes.
and indeed, they even got Danny Elfman back and said, "Hey, Danny, do you have just like a few scraps of the Batman scoreline about behind your settee or something?" But yeah, I love the idea that all these execs saw Batman, saw Tim Burton, Michael Keaton, and instead of going as you would expect now, going, "Oh, yep, this is it. DC's the hot property now. We need to capitalize. Let's get Superman back, get the Flash back, get an Aquaman movie in the works, go Wonder Woman. Whoa, 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 whoa. We're not having one star in the 90s." But even by that logic, no, no. What they did instead was go, right. Do you know what the kids are really into? 1930s pulp adventure heroes. Quickly, we need Dick Tracy. We need the Phantom. We need the Shadow. Sam Raimi, can you whip up your own version called Darkman? Great.
Younger listeners may be unaware that every single one of the now largely forgotten pulp adventure heroes Andrew hasn't just name checked did indeed have their own movie in the early 90s. Meanwhile, Marvel was selling off their rights to their properties to like Albert Pyun and Roger Corman. No one in Hollywood thought people wanted to see a Captain America movie, but The Shadow, that's what the kids are all going wild for.
It is. I mean, to be fair, there is an alternate universe out there somewhere where Batman and Superman, DC's kind of flash in the pan heroes, did die the early death they seemed to. And like the two biggest hits of the late 1940s, early 1950s are like the major ones, which are Captain Marvel, who we now know as Shazam, and The Shadow. So in some universe, like that's our Justice League.
The idea that a Shazam movie could make big bucks at the box office seems more distant than ever at the time of recording.
It really does.
Was it those movies? One of them starred Alec Baldwin, which is hilarious in and of
Yes,
itself.
that's the Shadow. He
That's
was
the
the
Shadow.
Shadow.
So it was the Phantom that had the incredibly unappetizing tagline "Slam Evil."
I mean, I'm sure plenty of people would love their evil slammed by Billy Zane.
Do you think that's why the film flopped? Because people didn't want to take their kids to something so erotic?
I think it must be. Because, I mean, those trunks he wears are very tight in that film.
But yeah, you're absolutely right that this is one of those classic cases of what my good friend Tim Lewis says are, movies that are made because the people in charge of studios are nostalgic for them, not really bothering to check whether the source material has any pull with cinema goers who are under 60. It's because it's not just that it's old. I mean, it's no older than Superman, really, Dick Tracy. But Superman has this very ahead of its time, very adaptable premise that makes it very easy to reinvent it for younger generations. Whereas large parts of Dick Tracy's gallery of villains just like topical caricatures of Al Capone's gang or something like that.
Yeah, like Dick Tracy's one of those characters. If you try and bring him, I mean, really into any other period than the 1930s,
Yeah,
he just doesn't work, does he?
not at all. You'd have to be like an extremely isolated, out of touch multi-millionaire to think that you could just pop him on a Zoom call with someone and that would make sense.
So, speaking of Warren Beatty,
Yes. He was attached to this for a very long time and it went through multiple directors. At one point, it was going to be a Walter Hill movie. And it's one of the things, I think the Walter Hill who did Streets of Fire could probably have made a movie that was quite like this, but he saw it more in the vein of The Driver. He wanted to make it quite gritty and low key and violent and urban. And it's like,
I mean, I would say it's at least like 3 out of 4 of those things. Because
yeah,
it is
fair.
actually quite gritty and violent. It's just not very low key in the slightest.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah, I was going to quibble with the violence, but it begins as so many PG certificate summer movies do, with a radio news report about gangsters shattering a man's kneecaps.
Well, and I mean, like, there's a good, feels like a 10-minute chunk of this film is just Dick Tracy gunning down all the other gangsters.
Yeah, yeah. It's definitely. I mean, it is bloodless cartoon violence, but it is a very different kind of bloodless cartoon violence to the type of thing you're going to see in a comic book movie now.
Yeah, like, you would not see Captain America pick up some kind of machine gun and just start blasting away like he's Danny
Nope,
DeVito.
absolutely not. No, no. But it's sort of an odd strip, Dick Tracy. I don't know if this were Behold. You see, I'm linking it in very carefully. We would have started by asking you what you knew about Dick Tracy as a comic strip, but since it's a different podcast, we might as well do that now, quite near the beginning.
Oh no, I was hoping since it was a different podcast we wouldn't. Because it might surprise you to learn, Graham, that I'm not entirely familiar with 1930s comic strip character Dick Tracy.
Fair, yes. I'm not hugely familiar with him, but I am aware that it has quite an odd publication history, it was, as you would expect, a massive cultural force in the 30s and 40s when it was being published alongside the latest news reports about Al Capone and John Dillinger and all of the other gangsters who, as I said before, Dick Tracy is battling thinly veiled caricatures of. But Chester Gould had a sort of odd belief that the strip's success, and I suppose part of it must have been down to this, but he thought it was down to the sort of quasi science fiction elements of it. The fact that Dick Tracy has these sort of almost James Bondish gadgets. And by the 60s, he took it in a very odd direction
Oh, actually, I
indeed.
might have heard it. Didn't he send Dick Tracy to the moon?
Yes, he introduced a character
Excellent.
called Moon Maid, who was, as her name suggests, a maiden of the moon.
I mean, that is something I appreciate about Dick Tracy, is all the characters have very straightforward names.
They definitely do, don't they? And one of the things about this film that remains very impressive and was a huge talking point in its day is that Beatty decided that he would use cutting edge prosthetics to make an all star cast look like these grotesque drawings that Brown had done.
Yeah, I do love the makeup in this.
Me too.
Like, what I say, I love, except for the one absolutely horrifying. Like, he only shows up in the first 5 minutes, but he's the guy called Little Face. And it's just
Yes,
a tiny little face and a big head. And
yes,
he's so upsetting to look at.
it's, it's true. Yes. There's at least three famous people I could compare him to, but I don't think I will because it would be mean. But yeah, he is a his head is like a beef tomato, but he just has this tiny little face in it. I've got to say that opening scene had the first thing in the movie that really made me laugh, although I'm not sure it was intended to, because Littleface is part of this opening massacre of rival gangsters that we later learn is being masterminded by Big Boy Caprice, and oh boy, we'll get onto Big Boy Caprice.
Oh, good.
But there is a very funny bit where, after all of these freakish looking gangsters have been massacred by Flat Top, played by the very great character actor William Forsythe, who here looks like Alfred E. Newman from Mad Magazine, the police turn up and say, "Oh, we can't possibly identify the men who've been killed." Really? They're the weirdest looking people in the world. How can you not know who they are?
Yes, I mean, one of them is Little Face. Another one seems like he has like a shelf built into his forehead.
Yes.
Although I guess, based on the amount of weird faced gangsters in this,
True.
maybe like in universe they aren't that strange looking.
Yeah. Yes.
Maybe there's like a whole Little Face district somewhere in the city.
Yeah, the little face sector. Yeah. So this gets traced back to another extremely bizarre looking gangster played by Paul Savino, who played an over the hill mob boss being left behind by a new breed of criminal in another 1990 movie, the tonally somewhat different Goodfellas.
Yeah, I mean, just in general, I love how many like famous gangster actors this film has in it.
It's like The Irishman, isn't it? Except with less weird looking faces.
Yes. Yes, the people in this look a lot less rubber than they do in The Irishman. And that's even including Dick Van Dyke, a man who Warren Beatty clearly just looked at and said, "No, no makeup for you. You don't need anything. If anything, everyone else needs more makeup just to look as implausible as Dick Van Dyke does on a day to day basis."
But all the underworld of wherever it is this is set. I can't remember what is this even named, this city? Is it just an every city?
Yeah, I don't recall them naming the city.
Mm, yeah, maybe that's kind of why Dick Tracy didn't last like Superman and Batman. Maybe comics readers back then just loved a name for a city.
Yeah, maybe if only the Hollywood execs had realized that was the secret.
Yeah. Yes, but this is all leading back to two people, and one of them is the reason we are gathered here today, which is Madonna as Breathless Mahoney.
I'll be honest, I kind of forgot that Madonna was in the film. I got
I
so
mean,
distracted by all the big face people, I forgot that like the whole point of this episode is that Madonna's in it.
that's true, yeah. Do you think Basie would have been like gutsy enough to give Madonna hilarious swollen head prosthetics?
I'd like to think he tried.
Yeah, yeah, he tried to get that past the suits. Can you remember how your young self reacted to Madonna's Breathless Mahoney?
I feel like I was still young enough to kind of get that. Oh, she is supposed to be attractive, but I don't know. Girls have got cooties.
Yes, I think again one of the things about Dick Tracy is that even though it is aesthetically more superheroic than the average superhero film, narratively you can only really bracket it with crime cinema. You know, it has very few narrative points in common with the kind of DC or MCU stuff that we're seeing now. And I think an MCU film certainly would absolutely blanch at having a character as sexualized as Breathless Mahoney. But as with Jessica Rabbit in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which was just, a few years earlier than this, you could sort of get away with that in the late 80s, early 90s, because the femme fatale of film noir was still kind of a cultural stereotype that people without a film studies degree could recognize.
Yeah, which does seem weird calling this film a film noir, since I think black is like the one color it doesn't use.
Well, it's got plenty of black. It's a very shadowy film, but I defy anyone to find a shred of white in it.
Actually, that's very true.
Yeah, it's an incredible looking film, shot by Vittorio Storato, and it's interesting that, isn't it? How do you react to those films that try to replicate the visual style of a comic book, considering that from Bryan Singer's first X-Men movie onwards, a large part, I would say, of the current superhero boom is based on movies based on comic books just trying to look as much like a movie as they can.
Yeah, I think it's always a tough one because I think probably the real answer is I would prefer something a bit more in between. Like,
Mm,
I'd love in this film how big and over the top and, for lack of a better word, comic booky it is.
yeah.
But that's also because this is a very campy, over the top film.
Yeah, yeah. I think I would find it very annoying if every comic book movie was like this, but looking back on it from the vantage point of a time when this just doesn't happen, I quite enjoy it. I mean, I'm a bigger fan of Ang Lee's Hulk than you are. Although I remember that when Ang Lee's Hulk came out, I just thought, oh, all those sort of novelty theme transitions just make it look so antique. They make it look like he hasn't kept up with what's happening in comic book movies at all. And and now you just watch it and think, wow, they made one of these where they gave the director some say in what it looks like.
Yeah, yeah, like certainly I like it when we get like a James Gunn or someone who actually gets to put some colours in his film.
Defo, yes.
Because yeah, it is. I do get quite sad that we've taken this very bright, colourful medium and just gone. What if we made it all grey?
Yes. What if every single battle scene looks like it took place inside a dust storm?
I think the thing I miss the most from comics in the films is like that sense of dynamism you get.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
especially if you read like a Jack Kirby comic or something, just the way that everyone's like so super extended, like literally leaping out the page.
yes.
I just feel because that's essentially what you should be capturing is just this idea that what you are seeing is literally the coolest thing that anyone has ever seen ever.
Totally, yeah. The early Marvel things, I think, films, I think, particularly the first two Avengers movies, had some of that splash page aesthetic. But I think maybe it's just one of those things we've lost as these things become more of a production line. There just isn't the time to design something really special like that. I don't know, but I think it
Yeah,
does work
which it's
very well
almost
here.
like you're trying to argue, Graham, that maybe films should be allowed to be like an individual artistic expression rather than just churned out to keep up to a regular timetable.
Well, oh, hey, oh, let's not go crazy here.
Yeah, so sorry to
Yeah.
come on the show with more revolutionary ideas.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. Although I think sometimes the kind of comic booky style of Dick Tracy is like a chicken and an egg thing, where it's also based on very strongly on film noir and German expressionism, and you think, well, a lot of what inspired the visual style of those movies was, old newspaper strips. You watch old film noirs, and the camera angle is Dutched so often, and you think, well, that didn't exist in films before this. So what influenced it? So it's at this nice meeting point, I think, where the two things it's drawing from, the noir and the comic book, can coexist quite nicely.
Yeah. Should we actually talk about Madonna?
Let's actually talk about Madonna, because I'm going to say it. I think she is well cast in this film, and her performance is pretty good.
I think she is all right.
Yeah, because we're dancing around this because perhaps listeners are unaware she hasn't been very active in films recently, but there was a time when having Madonna appear in your movie was a surefire sign that it was about to lose tens and tens of millions of dollars.
Yes, yes, indeed. Although that being said, I think this it's something like it's technically Warren Beatty's most successful film.
It is, yeah. I was trying to look this up because I had this. I remember Dick Tracy coming out and it was everywhere. Like there was a Saturday morning cartoon of Dick Tracy, which is
Yes,
like an
yes, there
insane
was.
thing to be. Why does that exist in 1990? But yes, I remembered it as being very successful, and then afterwards I heard otherwise. So I looked it up, and it's true. It was a very big hit and made a lot of money. The perception that it wasn't came from a very famous memo that Jeffrey Katzenberg, then at Disney, later the K in DreamWorks SKG, wrote saying that they were now spending so much on movies when you factored the marketing and the merchandising tie-ins in, it was going to be impossible for them to make a profit even if they were as successful as Dick Tracy. And what he was complaining about is that when all of the promotion was added into the production budget, Dick Tracy cost $100 million.
Which, God, that's remember a time when $100 million was like expensive.
What are you on about, Andrew? I can't imagine anyone spending $100 million on a movie today, let alone for a film about a children's funny book character.
It was a simpler time, wasn't it?
A simpler time, but a very familiar one. I mean, it's been blunted a bit by the success of Barbie and Oppenheimer. By the way, Oppenheimer production budget $100 million. Just that now that makes people go, wow, he saved money.
Yeah. What a thrifty guy that Christopher Nolan is.
But yeah, up until then, there was this narrative coming around that this summer was full of flops, and that's partly true. But part of the reason why things like Indiana Jones 5 and Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1 Taylor's version are not earning much money is because they cost an unbelievable amount of money to make and market, and maybe that should be rethought in the future.
Yeah, maybe if your film has to be the most successful film of all time just to break even, you need to spend less on your film.
And it's happened so often in Hollywood history. Like Cleopatra, the 1960s version of Cleopatra starring Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. Everyone thinks that's a flop, right? I mean, I certainly did for many years.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like one of the big famous bombs.
Yeah, absolutely. And yet, in 1963, it was the highest grossing movie of the year. The problem was that it cost so much, there was literally no way that they could go into profit with it.
Yeah, I mean, and the sad thing is, it's not just movies as well. No, it's a big problem in the video game industry as well. If
Right.
studios going, well, you've made this quite successful indie hit. Here's $1 bajillion, and developers go, but we don't know what to do with $1 bajillion.
Yes.
Not our problem. Make it back, or we're shuttering the whole studio.
Wow, yeah. So it's a good thing that after Katzenberg sent this memo, Hollywood thought, wow, yeah, we've been insanely profligate. Let's rein that in for a bit. And now everything's fine. But yeah, you're right. It was a very big hit. I would not be, I haven't checked this out. I would not be at all surprised to find out that it was Madonna's most successful movie at the box office because she's had other hits. You know, Desperately Seeking Susan did well, A League of Their Own did well, Evita did well, but I don't think any of them will have made blockbuster money like this did.
Yeah, I would guess Evita might be closest, but I still can't see it doing like massive numbers.
Hmm. And yeah, it's like I say, I think she's fairly effective in here. Part of what she is cast to do, and maybe this is the secret, is sing.
Yes, I will say, like any scene where she's actually, like singing and performing, fantastic. Like, I absolutely love the song she does, the Back in Business song, especially
Yes.
because it just plays over like a montage of Al Pacino just grabbing massive piles of dollars to himself.
Well, we've said it now, haven't we? The other person who
You're
Dick
right, I'm sorry,
Tracy's.
I've spoiled the big secret.
I mean, it's not the biggest secret in it, but it's definitely the most hilarious. Is that Big Boy Caprice, the Al Capone patterned gangster at the heart of this plot, is played with what I can only describe as a leftover chin from Reeves and Mortimer's The Ponderers sketches by Academy Award winner Al Pacino.
Yeah, Academy Award winner Al Pacino, who like designed the makeup himself and insisted, no, this is the chin I want.
He's sort of like, how can I describe his look? I think the best I can get is, what if The Fly, but instead of Jeff Goldblum and a fly, it's Jimmy Hill and John Waters.
Yes. I think that's the only way to describe him.
This is a performance, and I'll end it there. This is a performance, isn't it, Andrew?
It really is.
This is a performance. I was going to say that Academy Award winner Al Pacino received another Academy Award nomination for.
Good as well he should. Quite frankly, I would say highlight of his career. Like The Godfather, Scarface, all building up to this.
Once again, I must say it is a performance I unironically like.
Yeah, it's great because I genuinely I love ones like this where it's clearly someone just having just the absolute best time.
Yeah, yeah.
Just it's not about oh what's really going to get to the heart of this character and you know
What's
deliver
his
a
inner
truly moving
wound?
performance. It's just I'm going to have big silly fun. I'm going to run around misquoting presidents,
Yep.
loudly yelling about "Stop struggling! I'm not kidnapping you." Well, I am kidnapping you now, but I wasn't kidnapping you before.
It's, a, I mean, it is the absolute pinnacle of the hoo-ha Pacino mode, really, isn't it?
It truly is. Like, I'm
I
surprised he had any hoo-ha left after this.
Yes, I'm surprised he had enough hoo-ha left to deliver the legendary levels of hoo-ha he delivers in Michael Mann's Heat 5 years later. A performance that is maybe closer to Big Boy Caprice than people will admit.
Actually, do you think that's it? Do you think Big Boy Caprice just broke his brain, and now that's all Al Pacino can do?
It might have happened because he delivered big performances before, but it would be in something like Scarface, where you think, well, that's the character. That's not Al Pacino acting like Al Pacino. That's a particular character that he's developed who is matching. Scarface is a movie directed by Brian De Palma and written by Oliver Stone, so subtlety isn't going to be on the menu at the best of times. Um, so yeah, I think there's a level of sense to that, but this seems to be the beginning of Shouty Al.
Yeah. Do you think now Al Pacino just watches Dog Day Afternoon and thinks, I wonder who that guy is? He seems familiar, but I can't quite place him.
I was delighted to find out that one of the cops in this movie is played by Charles Durning, who is the cop who acts as a hostage negotiator in Dog Day Afternoon.
God, this is really some kind of like Rosetta Stone of a film, isn't it? Because like
Yeah,
you've you've got Al Pacino and James Caan, so you've got Godfather
Godfather.
connection, but
Yeah,
then you've also got James Caan and Kathy Bates, so there's Misery.
yeah.
Which also, how is Kathy Bates in this film?
For like a second, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
she's just like the stenographer.
yeah, absolutely incredible. I feel like if you added Kevin Bacon to this cast, everyone would just stop playing that game. It would lose all its appeal.
Yeah, because this is like the nexus.
Yeah, yeah. I have a pet theory about Al Pacino that if he wasn't so acclaimed early on in his career, if he wasn't like routinely hailed as the best living American actor, people would like his later performances on a sort of Nicolas Cage level, where it's like, well, they're not subtle, but you've got to love how he goes for it, and that is generally the level I enjoy them on. I mean, say what you want about him, I've never seen him phone it in.
Yeah, I've never thought about like Al Pacino and Nicolas Cage as being basically the same, but they are, aren't they?
They absolutely are, yeah. Their career paths took them in a very different way to get to more or less the same destination.
Yeah, just that whole I'm gonna go big. I don't know if it's good or not, but it's what we're doing.
It's something, yeah. It'll leave a mark.
As whatever I'm doing, I'm giving it 127%.
Yes. Yeah, I think you have to ascribe a lot of the star cast in this movie to Warren Beatty, really. I find it hard to believe that the Dick Tracy movie would have Al Pacino, Dustin Hoffman, and James Caan in if it was directed by Chris Columbus.
Yes, well, I know the kind of the story at least is with Dustin Hoffman. He's specifically in this film because Ron Beatty dared him to dared him to play the character Mumbles.
What was the specific dare of this?
I assume it was just something along the lines of, I bet you can't do this. I bet you just can't spend every single line of this film speaking in a completely incomprehensible, just gibberish.
I mean, if that was the bet, I'd have got Sir John Gielgud. I think Dustin Hoffman is maybe starting off with a home field advantage in this.
Yeah, because his voice is already Dustin Hoffman.
Yeah, essentially. It struck me as interesting that Dustin Hoffman is like the only big name actor where he does have some prosthetics on, but it's not enough to make him not look like Dustin Hoffman. And I wondered whether part of that is because, his screen persona is part of the joke here.
Yeah, I would assume so. Yeah, you're supposed to know it's Dustin Hoffman. Because he's got the funny voice.
Yes. I. That's Dustin Hoffman. That's my takeoff of this extraordinary actor's legacy. He sounded a bit like a sort of nebbish pile driver.
Finally, got him. You've had it too good for too long, Hoffman.
Yeah, I mean, it's not one of his greatest performances like Lisa Simpson's substitute teacher, but it is a lot of fun.
It is. And again, I think it's made all the better by that scene with Kathy Bates and it just desperately trying to take down what he's saying.
Yeah, that is great, isn't it?
And
Yes.
just the little gag at the end when she walks out with the massive pile of paper in her arms.
I think that's part of the sort of comic book aesthetic of it. It always goes big with visual humor. If you asked me what it is that specifically codes this movie as being comic book rather than film noir, I think the colour is certainly part of it. There have been plenty of colourful film noirs, but nothing quite like this. And yeah, also that it will do really silly gags like that that rarely turn up even in like a Coen Brothers crime film.
Yeah, like I think probably my favorite one of those is the one with the kid,
Mm,
where kind of in an earlier scene, like hops on the back of a car to follow Dick
yeah.
Tracy, and then just in basically every scene throughout the film, whenever anyone's in a car, like they'll have a conversation, and then you'll just see his like little head pop up behind it.
Yeah, that is good actually. Yeah. In a strange way, I'm sort of glad that I didn't see, unlike you, I didn't see this as a kid because I think when I was an actual kid, the kid would have annoyed me a bit. When I was a kid, I just wanted to watch grown-ups. That was the exciting thing, a peek into the adult world. But every film that was targeted at me was like always about some wise ass kid who accidentally blows up his next door neighbor or some shit like that, and I just found it really annoying.
Yeah, I think that's probably true of a lot of people, but I like the kid in this. I
Yeah,
think he's quite fun.
yeah, I think he's fine. I think he's fine watching him now. He's not pulling focus from like most of the great method actors of the 1970s dressed as spitting image puppets, but he's fine.
Yeah, I think maybe that's the secret is he is used sparingly enough.
Yeah. And also, I think, obviously part of what annoyed me about kid actors as a kid was the cutesiness, right? That's a common complaint. And I think Beatty is many things as an actor, a man, a director, but he seems to have little tolerance for cute. McCabe and Mrs. Miller is not a cute film.
Yeah, no, this is very. I mean, it's again when you strip away like the very bright colors, it's
Mm.
a very like gritty film, like just a sort of rough, grimy crime drama.
It is, yeah. And I wonder if it feels more about that because I guess, like war movies, gangster movies are one of those things that have retreated from popular entertainment without people really talking about that. I mean, People will always say, oh, they don't make westerns anymore and things like that, but it's quite shocking to look back at 1990 and realize just how many crime movies were released that year. You've got Goodfellas, as we've mentioned, The Godfather Part 3, Miller's Crossing, Wild at Heart, The Hot Spot, The Two Jakes. You think there's never going to be this environment in American cinema again unless something massive changes, where there is such a massive investment in gangster movies, because I guess people just don't want to watch them as much anymore.
Yeah, because I guess what would you say even was like the last high-profile gangster film?
I mean, you've got to say The Irishman, but even then, part of the whole reason why that exists is because Martin Scorsese has the clout to get it made. I can't think of the last time there was a gangster film. Maybe that Michael Mann film, Public Enemies. That might be the last gangster film that was put down in the summer months as a blockbuster.
Yeah, or I guess kind of. I mean, or really just. I hate to say it, but I think it's more just because it's trying to emulate Scorsese so much.
Mm-mm.
Is it Joker?
Oh yeah, fair point. Yeah, even that though is kind of a sign of decline that you can get a gangster film made now, so long as you pretend it's a DC
Yeah,
Comics adaptation. I mean, I actually have quite a soft spot for Joker, but I do think there is something very, very true about this tweet I saw when it came out, and they said, the horrible thing is realizing that Lynn Ramsey could have got a $70 million opening weekend for You Were Never Really Here just by changing the name to The Punisher.
yeah. It's a sorry state of affairs, isn't it?
It really is, but it seems to be changing. Like I say, I find this summer not unprecedented. It's a bit like the summer of 2019 when all sorts of, supposedly can't miss things like Dark Phoenix were flopping and you were getting things like Us and Knives Out passing the $100 million mark. But
Yeah,
it does
although
feel like it's a
slight
sea change.
asterisk there is I don't think I'd necessarily put Dark Phoenix's failure down to like a societal change.
No, maybe not. No. But I do think if COVID had never happened and if everything went straight from summer of 2019 to summer of 2023, you'd see a certain continuity here. A lot of franchises that Hollywood has relied very heavily on not making as much money as they used to. A lot of things that seem on paper like weird gambles of actually cleaning up. It does all feel like, we're back in 1990 and Jeffrey Katzenberg is penning that memo again.
Yeah, can't wait for Hollywood to ignore it again.
Yeah.
Just remember this conversation when we're all filling in for the Polly Pocket film.
Yes. Which you joke, but it's literally in
I
development.
know, I know. I've seen the. Oh God, what if there's another battleship?
Oh, well, if there is, we're back together for it, right? We're getting the gang back together.
Yes, the sequel that no one ever thought would happen.
I remember, and I mean, you can check back on the podcast we did a couple of years back about Battleship for this, but I remember just being ecstatic when Battleship ended and I realised he was going to play Fortunate Son over the end credits. Like the last confirmation that Peter Berg does not understand anything in his own
They
movie.
did do that, didn't they?
He did.
I'd
He did.
forgotten.
Hey, speaking about music, we've mentioned the songs Madonna sings in here. We've mentioned that several of them are indeed very good. We haven't mentioned that this should not be much of a surprise because these songs are written by Stephen Goddamn Sondheim.
Yes. Which again, just the talent involved in this film.
Incredible. I assume young Andrew did not see anything amiss when Stephen Sondheim's name popped up in the credits when he saw this as a kid.
No, I mean, I think at that time I probably didn't even really know who Stephen Sondheim was.
Exactly, yeah. But now, I mean, it's extraordinary, and even more extraordinary when there is a whole song on Madonna's tie-in album "I'm Breathless" about spanking, which is like, I must be one of the odder uses to put Stephen Sondheim to, right? Writing a Madonna song about spanking.
Yeah, but I mean, no, I literally can't think of anything to add to that except for that's a very weird thing to do, isn't it?
It is, yes. I watched, after Sondheim passed away a couple of years back, I watched the documentary Six by Sondheim, which is superb, by the way. You could make a good drinking game out of it by taking a sip every time he says. Now, at the time, this show was a massive flop. Uh, but yeah, absolutely no mention of his work on Dick Tracy, weirdly enough. I guess they thought Merrily We Roll Along was more artistically significant or something.
I mean, they do say true art is never appreciated in its lifetime.
I just wanted it to be mentioned just so you could say, now at the time, this wasn't a huge flop, but if you've read that Jeffrey Katzenberg memo,
See, it fits right in. Maybe
what would
that's why they got Sondheim involved.
maybe, yeah, maybe they were expecting it to be another Madonna bomb and thought, well, he's not going to be disappointed at this stage.
Yeah, exactly. If anyone can take the hit, it's Sondheim.
What would Jeffrey Katzenberg do if he was on Broadway? Would he be there going, we spent so much money making a Stephen Sondheim musical about a cannibal barber. What are we playing at?
I think he just like throws his checkbook down and walks off into the rain.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that we both liked this. I think the one glaring flaw of it is that you can cast Warren Beatty as Dick Tracy, but he still isn't much of a character, and the film sort of feels like it orbits a bit of a void. But there is so much going on in it that I didn't really care.
Yeah, I think it's almost kind of like the film is enough of a character in and of itself
Hmm.
that you kind of just need like a little empty shell to guide you through it.
And I
Because
also
he's
feel,
very much just he's the tough cop.
yeah, yeah. And I think like there's a part of you that thinks, well, did they need Warren Beatty to play this? But I don't think this would have been better if they'd have got some like minor league TV actor to play it. You know, I think the fact that it is Beatty is still a powerful asset to the film, even if he's not exactly being stretched here.
Yeah, he would also probably like slug anyone who tried to take it off him.
Yeah, there is that as well. I think we've established that he would retaliate with a merciless series of Zoom calls.
And really, can you imagine anything worse?
Not at all. No, I mean, Emmanuel Becky needs time off, you know?
I mean, I assume he just retired immediately after that, realised his career was not getting any better than that.
He retired after that thinking, I've done like these year-long shoots for Terrence Malick where I've spent like a month filming in a year of corn or some shit, but I never ever thought I'd be filming Warren Beatty's Zoom calls.
Oh well, you take the work where you can get it.
You do, yes. It's better than working for David O. Russell.
I mean, to be fair, so is getting mown down by like a field of machine gun fire as your car flips over and explodes in a massive ball of fire, and then Dick Tracy slugs you and you fall off into a big grindy gear machine. That's all better than working for David O. Russell. Because he's not a nice man.
He's a bad guy, isn't he? Sometimes you look at him and you think, oh, I'm surprised that such a temperamental, abusive dick can get work in Hollywood, a famously ethical employer.
Yep, who'd have thunk?
I think the most incredible thing for me about like the early stages of the Harvey Weinstein scandal, where it was before he'd been tried, but it had just been announced and he was stepping back from my duties at the Weinstein Company, was he had his name removed from a David O. Russell project. And it's like, wow, I'd hate for David O. Russell's good name to be sullied by association with a gropey, temperamental creep.
I mean, are we entirely sure that Harvey Weinstein didn't just like leak some of the details so it could be, oh, better take my name off this David O. Russell film? Oh, well.
But yes, before we close the book on Dick Tracy, do you have any other thoughts from either young Andrew or currently extant Andrew?
I think both Andrews think that the design of the blank is just like one of the coolest things they've ever seen.
It's great, isn't it?
Yeah, just like that, like flat face, the big black trench coat.
Yeah. It's a bit like, is it The Question? It's a bit
Yes, yes, the DC
yeah.
character who doesn't have a face.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I would assume. I think the blank was pre the question, so I would assume he might very well be based on that.
Conceivably, yeah. And of course, the was it The Question or Mr. A who was inspiration for Rorschach?
The question, but I think Mr. A like was a very similar character who, again, I don't remember if he was the inspiration for the question or if the question was the inspiration for him.
I like that we can draw a sort of a wiggly line between Dick Tracy and Watchmen.
Yeah, there we go. Like validates it as real art.
Definitely. Comics are not just for kids anymore, listeners.
Biff Bam Pow.
But yes, Andrew, would you like to remind listeners where they can find you online?
Indeed, you can find me wherever you can get the Behold podcast. Again, we talk about comics and TV shows based on comic books. You can also find us at Twitter at BeholdPod. You can email us beholdpod at gmail. Whatever Gmail is. You can also find me on Letterboxd. I'm at Cocus Blocus. That's the one I use as my screen name. I have too many
Yep.
different screen names, Graham.
Yeah, it's the modern condition.
So yeah, just have a poke around, see what you find.
Yes, as Madonna said to Dick Tracy.
That could very well have been an actual line in this film.
It could have been, couldn't it? Yeah, it's it's all innuendo scripting for her. There is not a single entendre for the whole course of the film. But yes, obviously I'm here. I'm at the Geek Show. If you subscribe to Byline Times, I'm in there most months, and I'm on Letterboxd. Just search for Graham Williamson. I'm on Instagram at Graham W Films. We've got another installment in our month, Oh Madonna, coming up on our Patreon tomorrow, if you're listening to this on the day of release, or a previous day if you're not listening to this on the day of release. But this is Madonna's biggest excursion into the blockbuster world, unless you count that terrible cameo she did in a bad James Bond movie. But on Patreon, Oliver and I are covering her biggest excursion into the art house, where she worked with the director of Miss 45 and Bad Lieutenant, Abel Ferrara, on Dangerous Game, which proved to be a match made just a match made. I'm not going to finish that. And that'll be out at www.patreon.com/The Geek Show. But we'll be back with another free episode in our Madonna month in a fortnight's time. I've been Graham.
And I've been Andrew.
And we'll see you in 2 weeks.